Now, when you introduce King 4, you will see straight away from the slide that what I'm doing is I'm working off the papers of PricewaterhouseCoopers, which are available on the net. They are also in your package, the downloaded document. Why? If you've got a perfect set of notes, use them. Okay? They've done a perfect set of notes. And this is one of the things where in-house publications is quite useful. They've put enormous resources to them. They didn't put them out there just to look, good. They are of great value. Use them. So I'm going to use them and lecture around them this afternoon as to what they've told us and the enormous resources that they've shared on the internet. We've got permission to do that. And we say, right, introducing King 4. Do we start off with introducing King 4 with paragraph 1? And I'm going to read it to you for free. We're going to start off by saying, where did it come from? How did we act? We're going to spend the first hour understanding our society and the philosophy behind King 4. And the challenge that each and every one of us has got in South Africa today about how we're going to live and carry on, etc. Right, now, in introducing myself, I work at the Rhodes Business School, probably because no other business school would have me. Okay. I am also on the Davis Tax Committee, and where we are investigating the tax structure of South Africa, doing a lot of work on inequality, etc. We are carrying on in spite of having a new Minister of Finance. One of the reports I'm working on in South Africa at the moment is the wealth tax report, to look at wealth in South Africa. Fascinating subject. Please, this is not the word of the Davis Tax Committee or Judge Davis. Nothing in the next 4 days is. So now we start with some philosophy. Why are we here today and what's it all about? Why did you go on to an MBA program? I want an MBA prof, right? Why? Haven't you got something better to do? Working late at night, wrecking relationships, costing yourselves a fortune. Why do you do it? Is it about the promotions, the money, and the power? And when you look at business in the 90s and early 2000s, it was all about the power. It was about the great and mighty CEO who's out there and he's saying, I am boss. This is the guy. I'm going to write a book about it afterwards. Jack Welch, Lee Iacocca, all the guys in the car industry were very keen on that sort of thing. And I say, no, it's not about that. That's not why we're here. Let's have a look at some home truths. Okay, the funeral service goes, man has but a short time to live. And when you get to my age, you start to appreciate that. Okay? And then we start looking at what have we done with our lives, bucket lists, how can we buy our way into heaven? And we start doing crazy things in our 50s, right? We want to leave a legacy. It's something in each and every one of us. It's even in a dog. They leave a legacy when they walk down a path. They stop at every bush, right? We are wanting to leave our mark on society. That's what it's about. We're wanting to make a contribution, right? We want something that will be remembered. So you ask, what is a legacy? Is it a dynasty? Lots of money, right? South Africans are obsessed with how much money they leave to their kids. I've been working on the Davis Tax Committee about estate duty. People will pay taxes through their lives. But when you say to them, we're going to tax your estate, they have an absolute froth about it, how much tax their kids will pay, when they should be worrying about actually whether their kids aren't going to inherit them stone broke, which is for most South Africans what's going to happen. Is it a building? You go to universities, go to Stellenbosch, okay, probably the wealthiest university. Every building's got a name on it. Okay? Every guy who ever went to Stellenbosch remembers them in their will. They put up a building. Okay? Is that a legacy? Well, not really. I mean, it's a building, we might use it at something, okay? You know, but you have to worry about it. And how long will it last, and is it relevant? Rhodes University has buildings and names all over the place, which actually have become a controversy. Okay, because some of them will date back so long we think, who the hell was that? Rhodes himself, the naming rights of this university for £50,000 that built the main arts block. And there it stays for life. Cape Town, Rhodes all over the place. The Rhodes name, you go to old boys functions and you see this guy wearing his Rhodes jacket. He says, if you change the name of your university, I'm never going to give you any money anymore. And you say, have you ever given us any money in the first place? And he says, no, we don't want to talk about that, right? So it's not a building. It's not about the money. Some people like a gravestone. That's a very Victorian thing to do. Make it in marble, okay? There's the legacy. That's where the bugger lies. And you think, maybe not. That's what I'll... So what's your legacy? Your legacy is your gift to last. How long will it be remembered for? And our greatest legacy is the great man himself. He didn't leave money all over the place. He came along. Do you know that the president of South Africa didn't used to get taxed? He had a complete tax exemption in the old days. One of the first things that Mandela did with SARS is he said, put my number down, I'm paying. Okay? And when it came to the end, there were a few million lying around. But nothing much, even with the books and everything else. But we will be talking about Mandela for hundreds of years. Gandhi, etc., other people, whose legacy is really nothing tangible. Their legacy is a memory. Okay, so that's your first example. And what we're saying is, we're trying to better ourselves to make a contribution. Okay, give you another example starting off today. Freddie Mercury. Okay, there was millions of pounds involved in that. What is the legacy? One guy having a great time at Live Aid. Okay? Everybody's seen it. We're still all enjoying it today. And the interesting thing about it is, the man died of AIDS 25 years ago last November. And when he died, we didn't talk about that. You know, he died of AIDS. Shh. And only last year did it come out that they made movies about the end of Freddie Mercury. And you watch them and they're absolutely horrifying. That is an AIDS death. And at the end of it you go, wow. Okay. That happens still in South Africa 150,000 times a year. In your country. We haven't cured AIDS. We've slowed it down a bit. We have 7 million HIV positive people in this country who are dying poor the same way Freddie Mercury died. And you want to come and do business here. So now let me ask you a question. What's the lunchtime news? You're all MBAs. You're supposed to listen to the news at lunchtime. What happened this morning in the Eastern Cape? GM pulled out. Okay? And that's a sad day for South Africa because it goes back decades to a great ad. South Africans love Braaivleis, rugby, sunny skies, and Chevrolet. And I was driving back here this afternoon, and when I heard the reason being we can make better money elsewhere, and you talk about our country and our challenges, that is an awfully cold statement, and I felt like turning right for where my chefs are down at Kenton and selling the whole damn lot. Because it's not today in business all about money. It's about legacies. Because this is the most important slide that you will see in the whole of corporate governance. It explains why we are trying to do business differently. That is a study of national treasuries, which says if we do not have 9 million new jobs in the next 50 years in South Africa, the place will degenerate into social chaos. We will burn the place. And if you don't believe me, take the statistics from the police. 15,000 service delivery protests a year are happening in South Africa. That's the start of it. Marikani, which we'll talk about, is also part of it. People have had enough of waiting. And we have to recognize that. That's where you do business. And you can't just say, profit. What about it? You know, General Motors profit. When you are talking about 1,500 people's livelihood threatened because of your profit. They live in Port Elizabeth. The only thing that can put a deposit on a car in Port Elizabeth is a seagull. Okay, it's a poor place. And you want to come and talk about profits? But there's another side to the story which we've obviously got to bring into it as well. So, what happened? There is the economic growth rates of South Africa. And we see that prior to 2009, in the Trevor Manuel era of South Africa, we were having a wonderful time. Growing at 4% per annum, no fighting in Parliament, okay? And then we hit a wall, and there was no plan B. Nobody saw it coming. They just said, following economists like Reinhardt and Rogoff, we will be back from this in just 2 years. It's just a blip on the radar screen, some people said. Nah, it wasn't. So economic growth rates did not return to 3 or 4% by 2013-14. It got consistently worse. Take it the next step. But something else happened. South Africa does have an ability to grow its population. So in 2009, Trevor Manuel had been Minister of Finance for 13 years. He had married the then head of ABSA. And people were sort of saying, nudge, nudge. That's a nice, cozy relationship. So it had to end. All good things come to an end. Manuel goes off, and Gordon moves from being head of SARS to Minister of Finance. Okay. What do we do now with Manuel? We make him Minister in the Presidency, in charge of the development of the National Development Plan, disaster plan, okay? Which was published in 2012. It's over 400 pages long, and nobody has read it. But it is the only plan that we have. And he started off the process saying, how many South Africans will there be? And based on the Actuarial Society estimate there in grey, they said it would level off, because those estimates were made at the height of the AIDS pandemic. It only took the delivery of some antiretrovirals, and the population starts exploding. So we are already at 56 million South Africans today, and by 2030, the maturity date of the National Development Plan, we'll have 65 million. 5 million extra people for which we haven't planned. Is that a plan? Is anybody saying, hang on, we better adjust this little budget here? Okay, this is the government's plan. The NDP, there's nothing else. Where's Manuel? He's retired. Gone. Has anybody in all this reshuffling said, hang on, go back to the NDP? The plan, our very action plan, is flawed. Gone. Right. So what we have is a position in South Africa that before the financial crisis, we were looking at 3.5–4% growth. Population growing at 1%. That's real growth, okay? Economy growing faster than the people. Then we fell in a pit, and we recovered quickly afterwards, but it wasn't sustainable, and it's gone downhill now. that we have to have a 1% growth rate before you've got any growth at all, because that growth is the population growth. You've got to be growing up 1% above your population growth. Piketty says it. 1% above population growth is good enough, sustained. But we're not even doing 1% before the population growth rate. And what happened with it when the financial crisis arrived was South Africa was in a fine position, but we said, quite rightly, we cannot decelerate delivery because of the financial crisis. We can't do what George Osborne does in the UK, who says austerity measures must be introduced. Because the word austerity does not appear in 9 of the 11 official languages. Nobody understands what austerity is. So you can't say, oh, well, let's all tighten our buckles now. We'll start having protests that will bring our country to a standstill. So we carried on spending at the same rate before the financial crisis, and our tax collections went down, so the debt went up. And when you put it all together, we now get to a position today where everything is meeting at a crisis point. Now. And that affects everybody in South Africa, because you can't, as General Motors seems to think, come here and make money if you've got social instability. You can't do that. And this goes further when we get people arguing people versus profit versus planet. People say, oh, we must spend all the money on the environment. If we don't get the people, I argue that if we don't get the people safe, there will be no environment. It'll be scorched earth. You can see why this lecture is sponsored by Imodium and Prozac. Okay? Frightening stuff. So then, on the 15th of February, the World Bank goes to Parliament and says, watch out! Your National Development Plan has said that you're going to produce 600,000 jobs a year. That is a job for every matric. That's how many people, net arrivals in South Africa, 600,000-700,000 a year. Everybody must have a job. That's what the NDP is out to do. And it says, but you're only producing 250,000 jobs. Wake up and smell the roses, pal. You've got a problem in unemployment. Vide what happened in General Motors, South Africa, today, just this morning. There's the World Bank warning about it in February. Do we see that? And we carry it forward. Add to that the AIDS debacle. So, when Mbeki comes out in public today, we should be saying, at the height of your administration in 2006, 48% of deaths in South Africa were HIV related. And that has now dropped to 29% because of the availability of antiretroviral therapy. But how Mbeki can pitch up in public and say that he was a great leader is beyond me. So I'll ask you a question. Who put the knife in Mbeki in 2008? Who was the guy who did it? Blade and Zamandli. He was the guy who led the revolt against Mbeki and the ANC. And just a month ago, he installs, now Zamandli is head of higher education, he installs Mbeki as the Chancellor of UNISA and says he is the greatest academic South Africa has ever produced. You've got to remember these things. I mean, isn't it a crazy world that we live in? Mbeki did nothing about AIDS. But the problem is, it's still with us. The infections have come down a bit, but there's still 350,000 new infections a year. 150,000 die, which means that there are 200,000 more people living with AIDS in South Africa every year. There's your HIV positive population, 18% of the population. And note, it's growing with no end in sight. So now, state comes out with policy. We must have policy. With effect from 1 September 2016, all HIV positive children, adolescents, adults, etc., regardless of CD4 count, can now get an antiretroviral therapy, because in the past your CD4 count had to increase before you could get pills. Is that solving the problem? Is that stopping AIDS?
No.
The pills doesn't stop a further infection. Where is the intervention to stop the infections in the first place? That should have happened in the 1990s and early 2000s. And who was driving the bus then? Mbeki. But he wasn't here. He was traveling the world in ZSRSA. Until the people got impatient with him. Said, where's the leadership? And he hadn't thought about the leadership. He thought he was going to be there forever. So you leave a vacuum. What happens if you leave a vacuum? Somebody jumps in it. And who jumped in it? Zuma. So I ask you the question, who do you blame for having Zuma here today if you're not a Zuma fan? There's the guy, he left the door open. Right. So now we go and we say, yes.
So how much of Mbeki's policy was driven by Clem Sunter's view in the late 90s on his high road, where are we?
High road, low road.
Well, his high road, where are we now?
I'll tell you one thing about Mbeki, he didn't listen to anybody. So if Clem Sunter's views, I think, would have bounced off Mbeki and hit Jupiter. Okay, I don't think he ever read it, regardless of the quality of it. One of the problems with Mbeki was, I'm driving this bus. What I say goes. I want the World Cup, right? Whatever it takes. So what happens in FIFA last year? Suddenly there's a question of $10 million that goes, why? Okay, that's what it took. And that will have to be investigated. Okay? So now we go back to Piketty and we say, are we sharing equally? What is it about inequality that we've got to talk about? So you can take, you see the politicians love Piketty's book. It's so big you can't miss it, okay? It's big enough to stop a door with. The politicians walk into Parliament with this book. And if anybody ever talks to you about Piketty's book, Capital in the 21st Century, and they say they've read it, you say, what did you think of the first chapter? And what was that about? And the first chapter is about Marikani. It's an autopsy on Marikani. The great man himself, his book, starts off with the significance of Marikana. That's what happens if you neglect something too long. And Piketty is about the distribution of income and wealth. And he says the world's become more unequal. We start talking about the top 1%. Now you see that not only with Piketty, you see it on, for example, CNN. That chap who's always going on about, are you getting your share of the pie? Okay? There are more billionaires in the world than ever before. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Why? Okay? Piketty talks about patrimonial capitalism. You inherited it. That was your starting point. Okay? So, if you listen to Richard Branson, he says the first million is the hardest. And he's right. But if the first million is given to you on a plate, you don't have to go through that struggle. So Piketty goes on and he says, the wealthier are getting wealthy and creating dynasties and passing them on to the next lot. Okay? And so we are getting more unequal all over the world. And he says government needs to do something about that. And he goes further. And he says, then starts talking about the rate of return of capital versus the rate of economic growth, R versus G. Now this is where you get into the whole question of growth and benefit for all. Trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics is going to do it for you, right? So the wealthy get wealthier and buy more yachts, so more people get employed to build them. That's trickle-down economics. Piketty says, no, the rate of return on their capital of the wealthy is so great that it outstrips growth, R outstrips G. And he says something needs to be done about that. Individuals with inherited wealth need only save a portion of their income from capital to ensure that it grows more quickly and that they've got more capital. That's creating a dynasty. And there should be a government intervention to stop that. So let's explain to you in this lecture who are the top 1% in South Africa. And this is an important thing to know because you're aspiring as an MBA student to be part of this club. That's why you're here, right? Or most people are here. Right? So now let's talk about that top 1% and who they are. And there have been some studies done on this. And the best one was done in 2007 by Atkinson and Alvarado. There's the reference down the bottom there. Alvarado, South African. Atkinson, that's not the Atkinson of fame for the diet. This is the Atkinson who's famous for inequality. He actually died in January. And they concluded, now this is very important also when it comes to fees must fall, that the top 10% wealthiest of South Africa in 2007 terms were earning 80,000 rands a year then. That's 150,000 today. If you earn more than 150,000, you're already in the top 10%. There might be some of you in this room that you're in the top 10% already. And you see that in fees must fall, where the cutoff for NSFAS intervention is around the 150,000 rand mark. So the idea of NSFAS is to provide for those in deciles 1 to 9. The missing middle then starts at 150,000 and they say, no NSFAS for you. Your parents earn over 150,000. Hey. Okay. Then there is the missing middle which goes up to 600,000, right? If you take what Atkinson said in 2007, the top 1% earn more than 400,000 rand per year, increase it with inflation, that becomes 600,000. So you are in the top 1% of all South Africans if you earn more than 600,000 rand a year. Pre-tax, does that make you rich? Can you afford to send your kids to university if you earn 600,000 rand a year and clear 350? And it's going to cost 100 grand a year to come to Rhodes? Bullshit. Not going to happen, right? But do you understand where the income deciles are in South Africa? I'm giving you a massive geography lesson here leading into King 3. Right. Does this mean that we've restored equality? Whenever I walk into pubs, people come up to me and say, we must stop talking about apartheid. That's all being sorted out now. We have BBEE has fixed it all up. Okay? And here is a paper by Mbowewe and Woolard. Woolard is the Dean of Commerce at UCT. And there they show the relative distribution of wealth in South Africa, but amongst the race groups. We haven't even started on this process yet. BEE is the first intervention. Okay? And then we add some other problems. Our tax system was doing wonderfully well in its tax buoyancy, its resilience to economic conditions. Up until 2016, fantastic. And then suddenly, pow, the tax collections have started to fall. And now everybody's in a flat panic because they're blaming. Now starts the political blame gaming. It's all Gordon's problem because he didn't make a plan. It's all Monyani's problem because he can't run SARS properly. And there are all these articles, rogue unit, okay, out there. Is that the problem? And people say SARS is going to collapse. Don't pay your tax, don't worry, SARS is going to collapse. Forget it. Okay, that's not going to happen. And we'll look at that under the tax side of what we're doing. But what we have in South Africa is all our taxes are under-collected at this stage, or last year. Oh, so watch what happens. We have the budget, and Gordon says, Houston, there's a problem. We're 27 billion under. He then goes off to explain it to the international community. Gets to London, hello, come home. You're fired. Per and 7, right? 3 days later, now the Minister of Finance and the Commissioner sit down at a press conference and say, we made budget. No, they made the restated budget from February where they downgraded the budget by 27 billion rand. And they gave themselves a pat on the back at the end of March that they made budget. Now, that doesn't mean SARS is going to fall over. But how do you feel? Okay? You don't like that. We don't like it. So we set a new plan for this year. And understand this is in setting the scene for corporate governance. Where does South Africa's money come from? Personal tax. 38% of South Africa's tax collections are from your salaries. Your employers deduct it and pay it over to SARS. If they don't, they'll go to jail. They're not getting into a tax protest because directors can go to jail for that. Then they collect VAT. And they'll pay the VAT over as well or go to jail. So, and we'll look at that on Saturday and Sunday. Your responsibilities as a taxpayer, your governance responsibilities as a taxpayer. So, this year they're hoping to get 16 billion rand more from you, the individual. They'll get some more from what's called dividend tax, but nobody knows what it is. Then we always get more from smokers and drinkers, and then the VAT goes up and there's a little transfer duty adjustment. What does it mean? More and more emphasis on the man in the street and the amount of tax they're going to pay. Okay? Now we're aspiring to be wealthy. Do you see the express train coming at you? Okay? So by coming onto an MBA, you know, just as a digression, I live with 3 enormous dogs. They lie all over my lounge and they eat my food and lie in the sun. And I go out there and I earn money and I pay tax and I go home and I use the after-tax money to buy dog food and pay more VAT. And the dogs eat it and shit on my stoop. Who's the fool? Huh? Who's the fool? That is the club that you've joined, right? And I do it with dogs. Some have got 3 kids across the valley here at St. Andrews. Okay, that's not dog food, pal. That's first class. That's 250,000 rand a year. For one. Which pre-tax was 450,000 rand a year. So we've got to watch out for this, okay? It's interesting, isn't it? When you look at who is picking up the can for this, right? Where's the reward? And this increasing resilience on personal tax as it goes up and up and up, and corporate tax goes down in its relative contribution. So introduce Julius. What would he say if he looked at that? He would say, increase the corporate tax rate. But we can't, because our international investors will run away. Our corporate tax rate is already too high. Okay, they'll either run away or find a way around it. So you can't just increase the corporate tax rate to fix this. Okay? Now, how many corporates are there in South Africa? Big ones. There are only 519, I think, who have income of more than 100 million rand a year. But look how much of the tax they pay. And this is part of the SARS success story. Go to the big trees, kick them, and the fruit will fall out the tree. And that's what SARS did largely for the first 10 years that it was going. Visit the major taxpayers. But those targets have cleaned up their act. Now we have to say, there is tax evasion still. But it's more awkward to go after. So we talk about the grey economy and the foreign nationals. Right? Now we're going to go and collect taxes in the townships. Man, you'll come back on a stretcher. Okay? It's a little bit more difficult to go after the same thing, isn't it? Okay? Don't tell me there's no income there. A lot of them, and we'll talk about it under SME taxation probably on Sunday, a lot of them are just doing society a wonderful favor by supporting themselves and providing a few jobs, and very importantly, providing services in the townships that would otherwise not be there. Okay? That's great. And you don't want to tax them. But hang on. Demonstrate it another way. 400 million packets of contraband cigarettes coming across our borders every year, when the tax component on that is 6 billion rand a year. Gone. Why? We can't police the northern border. Trump phoned up Jay-Z the other day. He said, hey Jay-Z, I've got a problem. You must build a wall, okay? And you must charge it to Zimbabwe. And Jay-Z said, hell, I haven't finished building in Kandla yet. We can't build a wall up there. South Africans don't like building walls anyway. We're not into that sort of thing. But it's very interesting, because when you take that, right, so I don't do it and I smoke expensive cigarettes, and I can understand that somebody in a township will buy a packet of Savannah, right, for 15 bucks and smoke El Cheaper. But whether I buy contraband or the poorest chap in the township buys contraband, ask you the question, who did you steal from? The poorest of the poor. When you look at tax evasion, and this is something you've got to understand in a country with its enormous levels of inequality, any form of graft, theft, corruption, tax evasion, etc., you're not stealing from everybody, you are stealing from the poorest of the poor. And I can understand somebody who tries to knock me off for my cell phone because he hasn't got anything, he's starving. But when somebody else goes and says, well, I'm going to do a bit of contraband and I'm a really wealthy guy, I think, I don't know, don't get that right. So now we say, and this is a big part of things in setting the scene, your incentives. Is there any incentive to come and do business in South Africa? Yes. Very little, actually. So people say to me, Matthew, there's no incentive to the taxpayer. There is an incentive. Personal tax incentives are 50 billion rand a year. What do they say to you? Go out and make a retirement plan. Don't become a dependent on state. But nobody's taken that package and taken it to the people and said, this is how you do a retirement plan. Okay? Then you go to the next ones. The next one is corporate incentives. Minimal. And people blame Gordon for that. Who's responsible for building corporate tax incentives in this country? Department of Trade and Industry. Irwin is still there. And incidentally, he went to the Gupta wedding. The other incentives, VAT. Okay, zero rating of basic food stuff is something we We'll talk about that later on. But look at this. Customs and excise incentives are 30 billion rand a year. 20 billion of them are for the motor industry alone. And it's not enough for Chev. And the interesting thing about it, difference between Chev and Volkswagen. In the financial crisis of 2008, you couldn't sell a Volkswagen to anybody. You couldn't sell anything. Did Volkswagen give up? No, they went international. Most of the Volkswagens that are made in Port Elizabeth are not used in South Africa, they're exported. And they re-engineered themselves and they saved their company. They didn't just bugger off because of investment return. It was an amazing analysis if you look at the figures, what they're doing. So, the corporate incentives, they give what's called the Small Business Corporation Concession. We'll talk about that. It doesn't work. Then there are all the little funny ones about learnership allowances, urban development zones, and research and development. And then there is ETI, the Youth Employment Incentive. And who swallows up the Youth Employment Incentive? Is it the small business? No, the big businesses are the only businesses that have the wherewithal to actually claim it back. The system doesn't work, so they swallow it all up. It's not working. Capital gains tax we'll talk about on Sunday. That's also increasing. Okay, and we'll get to that on Sunday. Brief words on personal tax, and then this is just introducing the world that you live in. We now go to the personal tax base, and we say, how many wealthy people? There they are. Those are the over 500,000 rand a year in light blue. They pay 63% of South Africa's tax. So look at how it changes with the Minister of Finance. Nene, he listened to the World Bank. The World Bank said, we're too generous to taxpayers in South Africa. What you should be doing is lowering the tax threshold, the level at which you start paying tax. Get more taxpayers. Nene liked that. But Jay-Z didn't do very well with Nene. So he brought in his henchman. Fortunately, he was only there for 3 days. Okay, and they brought the maestro back. Okay? And he said, no, I'm reading Atkinson. I'm not giving adjustment all the way across the tax base. The wealthy must pay. And he'd been reading Atkinson last year. The only reason we didn't get the 45% tax rate last year was that they had printed the National Budget Review before they came up with the decision, so they had to live with it. So when you get to this year, there's your tax table, and we see 1.5 million there. Who pays that 45% tax? Now, Judge Davis made himself incredibly unpopular over the budget because he said to them, I'm sure if you earn over 1.5 million, you won't mind too much if you pay an extra 4%. Everybody freaked out. But let's have a look at it. 1.5 million does not mean that you're wealthy. Okay, you ask all the broke yuppies at Mercedes dealerships, okay, on a Saturday morning. Okay, give me that Mercedes over as many years as possible. Right? It's not working. But let's talk about those people. Who are they? Okay, now I'm going to skip that slide. We don't need it. Look at this. 13 million people have a job in South Africa out of 56 million. I'm doing a new graphic on the distribution of the people. I'll do it on Saturday. Of the 13 million, 7 million, up here at the top, don't earn enough to pay tax. Then we have 7 million taxpayers left who actually pay tax. And 6.4 million of them are below 500,000. And they only pay 38% of the tax. Those above 500,000 pay 66% of the tax. But there are only 1 million of them in South Africa out of 56 million. Okay? So 2% of the population There you have them in that group up there. But that doesn't mean that they're going to pay the highest rate of tax. How many earn above 1.5 million? There's the answer, 103,000 in the whole country. So if you earn more than 1.5 million, you are 1 in 500 South Africans. That's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. That shows the level of inequality that you have here. That's why we come back to the National Treasury slide, which says we have to deal with getting more people, more taxpayers, more people in jobs. It's very urgent. Okay, there is more to business than making a profit. We have to build a country. Would you like a 10-minute break? 10-minute break, and then we'll... Right. Okay, everybody, we're going to start. The others can dribble in as they come along. Okay, after tea session, starting off today, we're going to go with the demographic changes of South Africa. We have looked at it. I think the conclusion you can come to from the first 45 minutes is Houston, there's a problem. And that's why we need people to come and help us doing it. Right. We would be able to find the 28 billion of taxes in South Africa every year, no problem. If it's not for bribery and corruption, tax evasion, the grey economy, and restoration of business confidence. That money, we are confident, is there if we're all not stuffing around. And that is the importance of governance. The importance of governance is that what we are saying is we cannot allow this filtering off of what is going on. So it all starts from these causes. Now let's go back to where governance starts. That man has put more people on the street than any other man in history when it comes to employment, Milton Friedman. And let's start this book off, or the story off, with who was Milton Friedman and what did he stand for. Capitalism and Freedom, 1962, was his great big book, and he's made some statements in it. He said, the best economic climate in which a business can exist is privatized and deregulated. And we go along with that and we think that all sounds fine. Oh, tuck in my shirt. Oh, that's a useful piece of class input. Okay, so that's obvious stuff. We all like to have a deregulated economy. We don't like form bashing. We don't like government interference. Then come the big words. It says that increases quality and reduces prices. Good and old economics 1. We're creating it more and more competitive because there's no government involvement. Now comes the perla. There is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in its activities designed to increase its profits. You go out there and you make profits. You do MBAs and make profits. You join Chevrolet and you make decisions based on profit only. To be fair, Friedman did carry on, and a lot of people miss this next bit that he wrote. So long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in free competition without deception or fraud. But that is the part of what Friedman wrote that we all forget. We just say, we want freedom to trade. And the big thing about Friedman, we would all long since have forgotten about him, was that his policies were sold to the leaders of the 80s. Thatcher and Reagan. Good old conservative stuff. Deregulate. And they bought into this stuff, and so they said, deregulate. Now, if you take Thatcher, for example, you can see the social damage of deregulation in the 80s in the United Kingdom. With good old coal miners. You know, Dad was a coal miner, Grandpa was a coal miner, the kid's a coal miner. That's all we know how to do in Wales, is hacking and hewing and running at the coalface with your head. Now you're out of a job because of deregulation. And Thatcher says, I'm sticking to that. So much so, when Thatcher died, Baroness Thatcher, a couple of years ago, there were some in the UK that were dancing in the streets. Reagan swallowed this rubbish of Phil Friedman's as well. Okay? Because what happened, if you roll the clock forward now to the Enron debacle of 2003, now you're totally deregulated. So if you look at what happened with California electricity prices, they went up by 400%. You had Enron manipulating the electricity price. What do? We have a fire. Why? Well, we can't bring in electricity through this channel, we've got to bring it in through that channel, and we'll push up the price. Open competition. It leads to mischief. And it didn't work. This is also coupled with another wonderful perler from Friedman, who also believed in controlling economies through interest rates. Higher and higher interest rates. You strangle inflation by increasing the interest rate so that the consumer has got no money to spend and prices are kept down. That also didn't work, but it was followed extensively in South Africa. So this allows people to go into open competition and, very importantly, bend the rules of business. Okay, you're doing it in terms of the rules of the game. Your interpretation versus my interpretation. So what's the rules to the game? Call up the tax consultant. Matthew, let's go for lunch. I need a plan. Okay? I want you to stretch this. I want companies all over the world. I want transfer pricing. I want everything. So the tax consultant became the belle of the ball. Men with briefcases who could bend rules were far more valuable than workers. Okay, because the board's sole mission was to look after the shareholder and maximize profits. When you get down to 2010, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the whole thing's unsustainable. Basically, in the lead up to 2010, everybody got sick of Thatcher and Reagan. So then along came the Clinton administration. Great fun, right? Bill Clinton I'm talking about, not Hillary. And along with that comes Alan Greenspan. He says, let the people spend money. Let them have a good time. Why did Clinton survive Lewinsky? His economic policies were working. Will Trump survive? No. He will survive if America makes money. If America goes back to making profits above all else and their stock markets go up, Trump will survive. That is the gamble that he's taking. And we see it today in tax, where I work, with international tax planning, especially in the IT industry, moving money around the world to where the best tax jurisdiction is. And there's one famous bishop who said, these people are robbing God. I think that's taking it a little bit too far. But in other words, there are no rules in tax. Do what you want. And you're trying to deal with that today with the base erosion and profit shifting papers of the OECD. It's all nice technical stuff. Don't read it, please. You will give yourself a heart attack. You'll never understand it. And we'll show you how to manage it on Saturday. And we see it, bring it back home here. Right? The tuberculosis issue, where people are going back on what happened 50 years ago. The directors of these companies are dead. We will never be able to hold them socially responsible. They made profits like never before. They didn't care what they did with their workers, if they died 10 years ago from asbestosis. If they were challenged as a director, they would say, I was making profits. And how was I to know that if you sent people down a mine, they'd get sick later? A reasonable person wouldn't have known that. I can't predict the future. I'm just a director. So we're now trying to sort that out today instead of prevent the problem. So there's a fundamental change. What we were doing until corporate governance came along was we said corporate governance is looking after the shareholder. A company is owned by a shareholder. He's the only person that you've got to keep happy in this whole story. Now it changes. We say we live in a kinder world. We introduce the new animal in the room, the stakeholder. We say, is all a shareholder has, close that door, is a right to expect dividends and vote at a shareholders meeting. You also have to take a part of everybody else who's involved in this game. The stakeholders. Well, that's a big word for society as a whole. What is your cost to society of your profits? That now starts coming into business. I demonstrate it like this. Wonderful picture taken down the road at one of the game farms last year. Right? And the game farm owner says, I'm making profits here. And that damn elephant, he comes in there, he drains the pool, he breaks everything and craps on the lawn. Shoot him. Why? That's profitable. They can see him when they go on a game drive that they've paid extra for. Right. But today, if they go and shoot that elephant, what will happen? It'll get out in social media and nobody will ever go to that game farm again. Okay? The elephant is the stakeholder. He doesn't own the business, okay, but he expects a fair deal. I want to drink out of your pool. Come on, is that too much to ask? That's my demonstration of a stakeholder relationship. So now we get all the professors. Now we get very effluent, is what I put it. Big words. And Mintzberg et al. Says corporations are economic entities to be sure, they must make a profit, but they are also social institutions that must justify their existence by their overall contribution to society. It's not all about profits anymore. Those are big words, but how do you put that, take that line there, and bring it into a boardroom and make it work, make it real? How do you do that? So now we look at business decisions. And we say, right, draw a spectrum. Going from businesses that are totally inefficient to totally efficient. Okay, Chev has got that dead right today. They've come down to South Africa and they've said, jeepers, you guys, with your labor, with your electricity price, with all your scandal around your Minister of Finance, I can find better places in the world to do business. Right? Risk reward. We are looking for total efficiency. What comes in corporate governance is a second spectrum, the social spectrum, which goes from, are you morally wrong and unfair and inequitable, versus morally justifiable and right. Two spectrums. Now, how do you measure two spectrums at the same time? With PowerPoint. You do that. Just invert one spectrum. And now you start measuring. And we go along the lines here of putting characters on the spectrum. So, take Trump. Trump is talking efficiency. Bring back the American dream. You work an honest day and I'll pay you. You're fired. America was built on 2 words. You're fired. Get to work, no notice, email cut down, there, take your box and go home. America still works like that today. Another guy who crept onto the scene Also waving the finger is David Cameron, the Eton boy, right? Him and his cronies are saying, well, economics are not too good at the moment. We must implement austerity measures. Right? We must all tighten up a little bit. Okay? Now, it's all very well for him to say that because dinner is served at number 10 in Downing Street, regardless of what happens, and it doesn't hurt you. But down the line, and there are quite a lot of reasonably poor people in the UK, they say, I can't even afford my electricity bill or my gas bill. How am I going to put food on the table? And he started to hack people off. We're going to come back to him in a moment. Then come the new thinkers. The new thinkers are saying it's not all about profit. You've got to be morally right. And this is where the thinking of Piketty is saying, come on, you can't own the world. We've got to do something about inequality. Right? Another guy talking this, and it was a tragedy that it didn't happen. I say if Bernie Sanders had got the Democratic nomination last year, he would have made president. It was the hatred of Clinton that finished it off. That's why they lost it. Sanders is appealing to younger people. He's saying, effectively, fees must fall in the United States. It's an international issue. You guys can't afford it anymore. We've got to do something about it. Saying a more socially sensitive society. It's a pity Sanders is so old, because he won't get another crack at it. But you see that one getting close last year and starting to gain traction with people. Where do you want to live in this? So what are we looking for? We are saying, worst business practice is where you are morally wrong and losing money. The next one up is your benchmark. The minimum requirement in the middle is that you are legal and you are at least not losing money. And where do you want your business to be? Up in the right-hand corner. Not only are we making a lot of money, but we are doing morally the right thing and we are making a contribution to society. So that's how that whole dynamic works and where business philosophy is going towards looking for a best practice. Well, let's go back to the Clintons. What happened? Okay, a year ago it was a foregone conclusion. Clinton would be back in the White House. What wrecked Clinton's image? Though we've seen it all before. We've done it. There's all the scandal. We don't trust the Clinton brand. That did it. We had that fun. We've seen the movie. We don't want to see it again. And because of that image, they would run to the Trump image. They must have been desperate or bonkers. And only time will tell about that in time to come. So we take that spectrum and now we fill it out. Use this in all business decisions. We say, in starting a business, any business, no matter how morally justifiable it may be, it has to, first of all, be legal. Okay? This is a big part. If it's against the law, it doesn't matter what the morals of it are. It's illegal, goodbye. Even if you want to make a moral case for it. And it must be profitable. Those are the two basic things in business. Are you legal and are you profitable? So in South Africa, are you profitable and do you comply with the Companies Act, the requirements of the Companies Act, or any other bit of law that might be in place? Do you see that? Now we're saying in King 4, we're kinder than that. We're saying the green areas got a little bit narrower. We're saying the break-even position is that you are morally even above the law. We've gone further than the law. The law is the basic requirement. There are other things that we have to instill into business behavior, And so we are saying we've got to be morally fair, and legal, and profitable. Do you see how the box gets a bit smaller? Okay? That's what we are out to do with King 4. How do you make that work? How do you even explain that to the board? Okay? We'll come back to questions later. Let's just get through the lecture, then we have the discussions. So we've moved it on. So when you come to the business school, when you went to a business school years ago, you got the likes of Jack Welch along to be the guest speaker. And he would tell you how he kicked ass. Right? Lee Iacocca's book's another one. Now more recently, last year in fact, big thing on YouTube, like we're doing here today and experimenting. We bring Sir Alex Ferguson to the London Business School of Economics to tell us what a very big deal he is. And he talks about how he managed Manchester United. Because what's happened with Manchester United after he left, we all know that that is a little bit embarrassing. And this old guy sits there and he tells me, hey, kick ass everywhere, even if it was Mrs. Beckham. Okay? And eventually a professor from Canada put up her hand and she said, but you can't run a business like that anymore. You can't be, a business can't be one person anymore. Because one person cannot always be right. Okay? So now, that's how our business school used to run. Just economy. Now we have to say, hey, whoa, it's not only about making money, it's also about the ethics. What are the balancing the demands of shareholders versus the expectation of stakeholders? What about the ecology? And integrated thinking. And what about equity? And somehow, you've got to force that into what we call the Rhodes pinwheel, and how we integrate those various petals of the pinwheel. And that is what we are trying to put into the Rhodes Business School MBA, because that is what goes with new governance. Okay? Is integrating those 4 factors. That's why you see it all over the board in the business school. Right. So now let's have a discussion. Who can tell me who that man on the board is? Huh? No. No. He was the richest man in the 1970s, Aristotle Onassis, in oil and shipping, right? He never wrote a book, but his business premise was, there are no rules. If I can outthink and outdodge and outsmart anybody, that's me. And he was a genius at doing it. And he had the morals of an alley cat. He used to drive around the Mediterranean in a great big yacht. He made yachts in the Mediterranean fashionable. Okay? His was a converted frigate from the Navy. It used to burn something like 100 tons of fuel a day. And the politicians, Kennedy, Churchill, and the whole lot would go and be on his yacht during summer, go and have a holiday with him. And there's a story about it. If you sat in the bar on the Christina, that was the name of his yacht, it had a luxurious leather on the bar stools. And everybody said, where do you get leather like this? And he says, they come from the penises of whales. He had a whaling fleet off Peru that used to slaughter the whole of the southern Pacific. And he knew they were going to arrest him. And when they did, he made a fortune, because he saw them coming and he ensured the event of his fleet being arrested at Lloyd's. He's paid out a massive insurance claim. He even profited out of that. If you had Aristotle Onassis today, he would be languishing in a 4x2. That is a jail cell, okay? Wouldn't have happened. The Queen. Look at that. for 60 years, the ultimate director. Never makes a decision, totally independent, above all scandal, provides a little bit of guidance from time to time. And when Britain gets into crisis, they rally behind their queen. Why? It's like when we rallied behind Mandela. The ultimate impeccable standards of behavior. Brilliant. For how many years now? 60 plus years. Okay? Now take this guy in the scandal, Philip Green. Okay? As you can see, he's a stylish guy. He had the BHS stores in Britain for buying smart clothes, all down all the high street stores, right? And you know, shopping in the UK is not very pleasant because it's cold. And people very soon got their sizes right, and they realized, takealot.com. It's a far better way to shop in the UK. It gets delivered to your door. And there's much more choice. So the high street started to die because of internet shopping. Right, so what does this guy do? He identifies a sucker and sells BHS to the sucker for £1. And shortly afterwards it goes insolvent, with a shortfall on its pension fund of £400 million. And he says that is not a liability of the company, that is a liability of the pension fund. It's got nothing to do with me. I am off to take a holiday in the Mediterranean on my new yacht. The extent of his new yacht is that it cost £1 million per meter. And it's 104 meters long. It's a city coming down, it's his own private city. 104 meters long, 110 million pounds. That is 2 billion rand in South African terms, is the cost of his yacht. So what happened? The press started to chase him. He couldn't get off his yacht. There were the paparazzi with their cameras all through summer. And at the end of summer, he went back to the UK and made a deal to pay some of the money back. Because by the time he got back to the UK, the press were saying, Queen, please, you must recall his knighthood. He can't be a sir if he behaves like this. Do you see the different type of thought that's coming into it? So you can read up about that one. Osborne, the Minister of Finance for England. A year ago, he was the heir in line for the next Prime Minister. Okay? Cameron had it that George will be the next Prime Minister. We were at school together sort of talk, and that's the new guy. The public hated him because of austerity. And on his other political agenda, Cameron is saying, let's have a Brexit vote. We all know we'll stay in the EU. Until what happened? Along came Boris Johnson. And he said, no, I don't think the EU is such a good idea. This guy had been mayor of London. He also looks like Trump. They've got the same hairstyles. And Boris comes out and he says, no, I'm not going with Cameron. I might be a member of the Conservative Party, but no, it's not the right thing. And because he had rebuilt London and brought the Olympics and everybody, he had a huge following. And Cameron missed the point. Lost it. And he lost the Brexit vote and he lost being British Prime Minister. Right? Because of a guy on a bicycle who had the right image. There's Boris going to work. Now this chap is an ultimate demonstration of how not to do it. Michael Gove. He was working on the Brexit campaign with Boris. Everybody knew that if Brexit happened, Boris would be Prime Minister. Until Michael Gove said, no, actually, now that we've got this thing through, I think I'd make a better Prime Minister. And he started white-anting Boris Johnson. So what did Boris Johnson say? I'm not in this fight. He withdrew. And everybody laughed at that guy. That was the end of his political career in 48 hours. And along comes Theresa May. Why? She was the only one who didn't have shit all over her. She'd been in the background. So she became Prime Minister. And who's that? Patsy from Absolutely Fabulous. Got nothing to do with the discussion. Right. So now let's take Julius. Let's have some discussions about the South Africans. Okay? Now, Julius Malema is brilliant. Whether you like him or whether you don't, he's brilliant at what he does. Give him that. But he's got caught up in other controversy. So he's got a fanatic support, but when you are asking people to follow him, they're saying, what about the money? What about the Range Rovers? What about the houses? What about the tax? And he can't shirk that image of where he's going. Why do we like him? Why have we always liked Gordon? Impeccable image. Okay? He will come along, appoint me Minister of Finance. What's the first thing he did? Resigned as an MP. I am not an ANC Minister of Finance. I am a Minister of Finance. I am independent. I will do what is in the best interest of the family. And we loved him. Okay? Why don't we like it? We don't trust it. Don't trust it. And that's not sustainable. But look at another thing. Put all of these leaders on a board. And they're doing this. Okay? And even that has changed. People have changed. And you've got to take account of this. How people have changed, and that's also part of the governance thing. Right? What is the reaction when you wave your finger at people? It's changed. And the world has changed, when with it goes corporate governance, which is why you need to have a little look at generationalism. Right? So your great-grandparents, my grandparents, were Generation Jones. Sorry, my parents, Generation Jones. What were their aspirations in life? Survival. Food, clothes, okay? Basic stuff. Maybe batteries for a radio. Right? Then comes along the next generation. My generation. This is when you're born, eh? The baby boomer generations. Things started to grow. We got appliances in the house, and we could afford a car. So we stayed at home and made babies. The American families of the 60s and 70s had six children. Right? That's what you did. And it got even bigger in Generation X. Generation X is the 70s, where you get the muscle cars, and up to 1974, just more and more exit. If you want to put we'll put some faces to it in a moment. Then come another group, very interesting, the millennials, Generation Y, born after 1980. Why are they called the Generation Y? No, because they walk with their pants down. Okay? Now we're going to then come the current kids called the silent generation, Generation Z. You can't even talk to your kids, you've got to send them a WhatsApp. Okay? And we haven't named the next generation yet. For now, we'll call it Generation Bieber. Okay? Right, now let's start filling it in and looking at the differences in people. Look at bands. In the 40s, you went out to a dance. You had a massive number of people there blowing things, and it was all dressed up to the nines and everything else. Right. That's how it was. Change came, relevant 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. One man changed it all. Chuck Berry. A new swing, a new move, the duck dance and all the rest of it. And when he died 2 weeks ago, even his successors like Keith Richards saying he was the guy who showed us the way. Elvis and everybody else going to a new look. So then you got, who does the Stones copy? Biggest influence on the Rolling Stones? Chuck Berry. And they've been doing it for 60 years. And along the way, you get other ones, right? We get the likes of Fleetwood Mac in the 70s, a sort of cool Chicago type feel in America. That was it. 70s was boring. But then, you really get it when you get to Generation Y, the start of Generation Y. Who's the hero? Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten. It went mad for 5 years. People got bored. Why? It's the start of Friedmanism and the start of Thatcherism and the rebellion against it. Angry music. Angry music. And it lasted for 4 years. And then the whole lot were put to toast by one thing. 1984 is when it all changes. At exactly the same time as the release of Thriller. What was it? Was it Michael Jackson's music? No. It was the moon dance, right? No, it wasn't. For the first time, you could see it in the home. Michael Jackson Thriller is exactly the same time as MTV, right? Technology came out of the laboratory and entered the lavatory. It came into the home. And now people can see it on devices, and that thing has gone all the way through. Which means that people changed. Because people now have cell phones and devices, and this has led them to change. They see different things in the world. And they start behaving differently. It's very important in marketing. Who is the decision maker in the home? Children. 65% of South African cars are chosen by their children, not the driver. That's why you can sell a Toyota Fortuner. Okay, only his kids could have bought that thing. There's no way a self-respecting man would drive that thing. Okay? Wait, it's got a point to it. So now people, the youth, become far more, I'm not saying arrogant, but far more stateful in what's going on. And if you wave a finger at people now, what do? They say, I am Generation Y. And I'm giving you a finger back. There's a response. Goodbye. Okay. Now what else do you see in that picture? Okay. Why did I put that there? I put that there for a reason this afternoon. New way of thinking. The judgment 2 weeks ago in the Constitutional Court, you may now smoke tobacco at home. And boy, oh boy, did you see the reaction of that, the old conservatives? How can you do this? Whoa. Judge Davis, again from the Davis Tax Committee, made that judgment. And you see there is these old farts on social media saying what it's going to do and everything. They haven't read the judgment. What's Davis saying? He's looking at that and he's saying, hang on, there's a point to this. The legislation that you are trying to convict this person under is old apartheid legislation. It's never been revisited. In African culture, Dacha, marijuana, call it what you want, has been used for palliative care for centuries. And we've never gone back and looked at that. So, the privileged are using aspirin, the underprivileged are using this thing. It is their right to do that. Then he goes into your constitution and he says, the most private thing of all is your home. Your right to privacy in the home is entrenched in the constitution. If you want to smoke dope at home, and you see this right through all the legislation, you've got a right. Same as you've got a right to drink at home. And some would say there's more violence from brandy than there is ever from dacha. And he's saying it's time to think again. That's why we're bringing this type of thought into it. So let's take it and we say, right, there they are. What are the other big differences? People are living long ago. Your life expectancy back in the 40s was 55 to 60. What's the life expectancy of a South African today? Anybody want to tell me in the class? 50. South Africa's life expectancy it's varied. You must be very careful about this. The average life expectancy of a South African is 56 now. But you must distinguish that. That's the average. If you have had good medical clear, plus good food, and you've never done menial work, your life expectancy is 80. Okay? That's why you never do gardening, okay? Never pick up a spade, it reduces life expectancy. Okay, we know that's a great excuse. So what we are getting is extended life expectancy, where women particularly are living till over 100. That used to be really something. You used to get a telegram from the Queen all over the world if you lived to 100. Now it happens every day. So those are huge differences. And there's something else that's changed. Okay? Now, north of Pretoria, we make a big thing of this thing. Now, why are we so fascinated by that skull? Why? What's the significance in the evolution of man of a skull? What's missing from that skull? 2 very long, big teeth. So, watch the rest of the mammals. What's the first thing dogs do when they greet each other? I've got big teeth, look. I'm going to stuff you up. Baboons do it too. Man comes along and he smiles. He says, look, I've got no teeth. Work together. Take the aggression out of it. And that is the important issue in this. Why were we Homo sapiens? It's the first lot of mammals that got to work together properly. If you can work together, you can do anything. And that applies also in business. Aggression in business makes people frightened. Did that man make you frightened? It's calm. Trusted other people. That's why we worked with him. Okay? So you've got to take that into it as well. So now we move into King. 2 hours after I arrived here. And we say, right, there is a morality spectrum which is the worst of it all is it's illegal and you go to jail. And in business, there is also a degree that you can go in pursuing morals so far that you give everything away and you go insolvent. You still have to make a profit. Your starting point in governance is to say, I have to be legal. That is your benchmark, and that is where you are looking at the basics of the Companies Act. That's why we had Glynis in here this morning to say, whatever you do, will you please start? You can't be doing too much wrong if you observe the Companies Act. Then, King 3, 2009, took a sort of slight of it. He says, look, you can come along with it or not. If something goes wrong, you'll have to explain why you didn't follow the guidance in King 3. King 4 now comes along November 2016, and it says apply and explain. Not wait for it to go wrong. We now have to do it and show how we are running our companies. We've got to be proud of it. We've got to go out there and say, there's nothing sinister about how I run my company. I run my company in terms of the guidelines of King 4.